On the day of the auction, 31 turkeys stood unsold. They weren't ailing, nor were they close to expiring. Their issue lay in a distinct characteristic that caused auctioneers to frown and potential buyers to keep their wallets shut. They were too diminutive for commercial processing and too irregular in shape for the festive holiday advertisements. One particularly large male turkey bore a wing that drooped noticeably, hanging at an angle against its body, as though it had a long-standing dispute with gravity it had never resolved. Another possessed a head of such a pale hue it resembled bleached bone. While this held no medical significance, it presented an unsettling appearance to all who beheld it. And that was reason enough for rejection. 3 of the birds sported a color that defied easy categorization. It wasn't the rich bronze of the broad-breasted breeds, nor the pure white of the commercially raised fowl. It was an intermediate shade, which the auction catalog had vaguely described as non-standard coloring, leaving it at that. The remainder of the flock were simply too small. They failed to meet the market's demand for birds that achieved a specific weight by a particular date, reliably and uniformly, without causing any inconvenience. These birds, it seemed, had somehow missed that memo. For 23 years, Cecil Boone had presided over the livestock auction just outside of Granger, Tennessee. He possessed an intimate understanding of the auction room even before the bidding commenced, akin to how a seasoned preacher knows their congregation, judging by the quality of the hushed atmosphere and the posture of those assembled. On this particular chilly morning in late September, the silence spoke of individuals who had already made up their minds. Then Ada Birch entered. She was 19 years old. She had journeyed for 40 minutes from her family's property on Cutter Creek Road in a pickup truck. Her uncle had sold her for $400, a transaction she suspected was motivated by his knowledge of a hidden flaw she was unaware of. In her coat pocket, she carried $61. Back home, she had an 81-year-old great-aunt named Clotail, a woman of strong opinions, which she generally kept to herself, making the pronouncements she did share all the more impactful. Furthermore, as those who knew Ada would readily attest, she had a unique ability to look at something overlooked by everyone else and pose a question that simply didn't occur to others. The question she posed, standing before the 31 turkeys that the room had collectively deemed not worth the effort, was straightforward. What do they weigh now? Cecil Boone regarded her. On average, 8 to 9 pounds. They'll gain. Ada's gaze swept over the tom with the drooping wing, the pale-headed one, and the 3 birds with the unclassifiable coloring. They regarded her in return with the alert, contemplative attention that turkeys display when assessing a situation. "What will you take for all of them?" she inquired. The room took notice. It always did. A man named Harwell Pitts, who farmed 200 acres to the east of Granger and had been attending Cecil's auctions since before Ada was born, turned from the coffee station and observed the young woman standing by the pen of the misfits. He remained silent for the moment, being the sort of man who collected his thoughts before expressing them. 2 younger men near the back exchanged a knowing glance. Cecil Boone stated a price. $22 for the lot. Ada meticulously counted out the currency on the auction rail. Cecil accepted it, then proceeded to complete the paperwork with the expression of someone who had witnessed countless events unfold in various directions and had long since abandoned any attempt to predict their course. Harwell Pitts watched as she began loading crates into the truck. He finished his coffee, set the cup down, and remarked to the man beside him, not in a hushed tone, "That girl just bought every turkey in the county that's not right. Thanksgiving's going to be quite something." The man beside him chuckled. Ada loaded the final crate and headed home. Hit that like button. Drop your city in the comments. I want to know where you're watching from tonight. Now, let's begin. The Birch homestead on Cutter Creek Road encompassed 22 acres, a parcel sizable enough to feel like a farm, yet not quite large enough to operate one in the same manner as the surrounding neighbors. Ada's parents had relocated to Knoxville 4 years prior, when her father secured stable employment there, leaving the property in the care of her great-aunt Clotilde. Clotilde had resided there since 1967 and had no inclination to depart for any reason that had yet been presented to her. Clotilde Birch, at 81 years of age, moved with a deliberate efficiency, characteristic of a woman who understood that unnecessary exertion was a form of waste she could ill afford. She meticulously tended to her kitchen garden, maintained the household, and harbored a collection of firmly held opinions on farming, cooking, weather, human nature, and the proper execution of most tasks. These opinions she shared when solicited, and sometimes when not, always concisely and without embellishment. Ada had returned to the property in the spring, not with a concrete plan, but because Knoxville had offered none, and Cutter Creek Road, at least, provided the comfort of familiarity. Upon Ada's call, Clotilde had stated, "There's a room here, and the place could use some work if you're looking for something to do." Ada had driven back that same week. Her return was not motivated by an intention to raise turkeys. Rather, she sought to discern her next steps, a plan of sorts, though not one that satisfied everyone who inquired. What transpired next was the arrival of 31 peculiar turkeys in the bed of a questionable truck on a raw September morning, with Thanksgiving just 8 weeks away. She arrived back home by 2 o'clock in the afternoon. Clotilde emerged onto the porch, clad in her sturdy barn coat and house slippers, a combination she wore without apology, having earned the right at 81 to prioritize practicality in her attire. She surveyed the crates in the truck bed, standing there for a considerable moment. "What's peculiar about them?" she inquired. Ada responded, "Nothing's wrong with them. They're just built differently." Clotilde's gaze fell upon the tom with the drooping wing, who observed her through the crate's slats, with an air of dignified patience. She then looked at the 3 birds with the unusual coloring. "Built differently," she repeated, her tone suggesting she was setting the statement aside for future consideration rather than immediate acceptance. "They were $22, Ada supplied. Clotilde then shifted her attention back to the birds. "You'll need to repair the old turkey enclosure," she instructed. "It's on the east side of the barn. The wire is missing at the bottom." With that, she retreated indoors. Ada commenced unloading the crates. The old turkey pen had not housed turkeys since Ada was 7 years old. Clotilde's late husband, Earl, had maintained a small flock then, selling dressed birds every November to neighbors, church members, and a select few townspeople who made the journey specifically because they had been prior customers of Earl's and intended to continue the tradition as long as he offered them. Earl Birch had passed away in 2009. Since then, the pen had served as a storage area for equipment, a corroded tiller, 3 rolls of aged fencing wire, and 2 wooden crates that had become cozy residences for field mice who had long since considered themselves permanent tenants. Ada cleared out the enclosure in 2 days. For the damaged wire at the bottom, she purchased new hardware cloth from the co-op in Granger, which cost $14, leaving her with $25 remaining. She reset 3 fence posts that had leaned precariously, past the point of any pretense of remaining upright. She raked the floor and spread fresh wood shavings, a bag of which Clotilde retrieved from the barn without being asked. This was Clotilde's customary way of assisting, locating what was needed and doing so with utmost discretion. The turkeys were moved into the enclosure on a Wednesday evening. They emerged from the crates with the cautious confidence of animals conducting a formal survey of new accommodations. The tom, with the drooping wing, whom Ada had begun to nickname Duke, due to his bearing of a ruined dignity she found captivating, completed a full circuit of the pen before engaging in any other activity. The pale-headed bird stood centrally, gazing skyward for reasons unclear. The 3 non-standard colored birds remained in a loose formation, a grouping they would maintain throughout Ada's acquaintance with them. She stood by the pen fence in the diminishing light, observing them settle. Clotilde appeared beside her, holding a cup of coffee, which she handed to Ada without inquiring if she desired one, presuming, of course, that she would. "Earl kept turkeys here over 30 years ago," Clotilde remarked, her gaze fixed on the birds. "Different birds, but 30. Ada looked at her. "He always said the secret was time," Clotilde continued. "Most people rush a turkey. Earl never rushed anything." Clotilde then went inside with her coffee. Ada remained by the fence until the fading light rendered visibility difficult, and then she too retreated indoors. October arrived with cool, clear skies, and the turkeys thrived outdoors. Ada had extended their grazing area to a section of the back pasture, using portable fencing she fashioned from materials found in the barn. It was an improvised and not particularly refined solution, but it was functional. The birds took to the new arrangement immediately, moving through the grass with the focused intent of creatures who took their foraging tasks seriously. And their primary occupation, as far as Ada could ascertain, was locating and consuming every edible item within their reach. Duke, despite his compromised wing, ranged as far as any of the others. He had developed a technique for managing the wing that minimized air resistance without fully rectifying the structural issue, a practical adaptation that Ada found herself increasingly respecting. The pale-headed bird, whom she had started referring to as Ghost, seemed an apt designation, as it was the most far-ranging member of the flock, perpetually at the furthest periphery of their designated area, consistently discovering what others had overlooked. The 3 birds of unusual coloring she collectively designated as the coppers, for in the right light their distinctive plumage resembled aged copper, a blend of green, brown, and a rich, almost ethereal hue. She made a conscious decision not to name all 31 birds, maintaining that boundary. However, that resolve wavered. By the end of October, 28 of them bore individual names. Clotilde observed the entire operation from her usual vantage points, the porch, the kitchen window, and the barn doorway during her morning chores. She offered her insights when they arose and maintained a quietude when she had nothing to add, and Ada came to value both equally. One evening in mid-October, Clotilde remarked, "Earl used to say you could judge a good turkey by the way it walked." Ada looked up from her feed records. "How so?" Clotilde gestured towards the pasture, where the flock was visible in the late afternoon sun. as if it had a destination, she stated. Not hurried, but purposeful. Ada studied the birds. Duke was pacing along the fence line with his characteristic, slightly tilted dignity. Ghost was in the far corner, engaged in an activity Ada couldn't quite discern from her distance. The coppers were diligently working a patch of ground near the old apple tree with intense concentration. They all walk like that, Ada observed. Clotilde regarded them for a moment. Yes, she confirmed. They do. She picked up her coffee and returned to the stove. The first individual to inquire about the turkeys was Harwell Pitts. He encountered Ada at the co-op in Granger on a Saturday in late October while she was purchasing feed. He was a tall man with a face weathered into a simplified visage, all extraneous features having been eroded by decades of exposure and labor, leaving a direct and legible countenance. "Those turkeys you acquired at Cecil's," he began. "Are they surviving?" Ada confirmed they were. He nodded slowly. "All of them?" "All 31, she replied. He looked at her with an expression that was difficult to decipher, not precisely skeptical, but more akin to a man revising an assessment. "What do you intend to do with them?" She explained her plan. "Sell them dressed for Thanksgiving." She had 8 weeks. The birds were already gaining weight, albeit at a slower pace than commercial breeds, yet consistently. She anticipated them reaching the 14 to 18-pound range by the 3rd week of November, which, while lighter than a broad-breasted bronze, was not unacceptably small. Harwell remained silent for a moment. "Folks around here buy commercial birds," he stated, not as a challenge, but as a factual observation offered for her consideration. Ada acknowledged she was aware. "From the grocery store," he elaborated. 39.49 cents a pound on sale. Ada confirmed she knew this as well. Harwell picked up a bag of mineral supplement, examining the label. "What are you planning to charge?" he asked. She informed him. He placed the bag back down and looked at her. "That's 4 times the grocery store price." Ada confirmed this. He was quiet for another moment before saying, "You'd better be absolutely certain about those birds." He then retrieved the mineral supplement and proceeded to the checkout counter. Ada paid for her feed and drove back home. Clotilde was in the kitchen upon Ada's return. She was occupied at the counter with apples harvested from the old tree in the back pasture, the same tree beneath which the turkeys had foraged throughout the preceding month. Ada recounted her conversation with Harwell Pitts. Clotilde listened attentively, without pausing her task. When Ada finished, Clotilde inquired, "What did Earl charge?" Ada did not know. She had not known Earl well enough to recall his pricing.